Welcome back. Another episode of Dynasty Theory, proud partner of DynastyDaddy.com and proud member of the DLF Family of Podcasts. I'm John Bauer. Find me on Twitter at the Bauer Club. A few days late this week, but I figured, Dan, we put the new episode out Saturday. I wanted to give people some time to catch up, let it really fully marinate. So even though if you're watching on YouTube, it says live every Tuesday night, it's a little bit of a lie this week. That happens often. Anyway, Dan, what's up, buddy?
Hey, good to be here, JB. I think with all the coaching news, those few extra days didn't hurt. And, you know, they were kind of like a few therapeutic days you gave me too, JB. I was at weightlifting with my son tonight and talking to all the coaches, and there was a Steelers fan, a Dolphins fan, a Browns fan, and me as a Dallas fan in the room there, man. And we were all just having our little therapeutic session as we got knocked out of the playoffs. So, man, a little heartbroken tonight, but I've had a few days to get over it, so ready to roll.
That's all right. And with a few extra days, I was hoping we would get something with one of these coaching vacancies, and we didn't. But we did find out there's not going to be a vacancy in Dallas. What are your thoughts on Mike McCarthy coming back?
Oh, JB, not in the show notes, but I've been like holding my phone really close, waiting on the post, and then you got John Bauer throwing in the fake news of like, I don't know what you posted with sirens the other day when the Cowboys news was
Denzel Mims and Marquez Callaway were signed to a future deal in Pittsburgh. I made it a 3-alarm breaking news, and everybody was like, "Come on, JB." Anyway,
the biggest tease of the week there by JB, man. But I don't know, man. I've like some mixed feelings, and it'll tie into what we talk about tonight. Like, I feel like it's this rare time that you normally don't have Bill Belichick, Mike Vrabel, and a Coach Harbaugh all on the market at the same time. So if there was a time for any teams to move, and I felt that way about my Cowboys, I thought now was the time. And they said no. I know Jerry's 81, so there's some continuity things there. And Coach Harbaugh, from a fantasy football perspective, not Coach Harbaugh, Coach McCarthy, we saw Dak have his best year. We had Lamb have his best year. So from a fantasy football perspective, maybe it's not bad news. Although I do hope Coach Quinn, gets a job, one of these vacancies, so at least Dallas can have something to say, hey, we're going to do something different and improve next year.
Yeah, I mean, what we're here to talk about is the fantasy implications. And as far as Dallas goes, not to spend too much time on it, but I think it's good news that you talk about continuity, that things aren't going to be changing. I think it's great news for Dak, CeeDee Lamb, of course, Jake Ferguson. We'll see what happens with the running back position. Wouldn't surprise me to see Derrick Henry maybe land there.
Yeah, and that's where you hope. Hope maybe they changed the O-line coach. I'm not sure. I think there were some schematic problems in the run game. There's some questions on Pollard, but hey, if a King Henry or someone comes in there, there's definitely hope for even some more offensive production in Dallas.
And I still think Tony Pollard was recovering a little bit from that. What's it called? The tightrope surgery that he was recovering from. Like I said, I know I'm lagging a little bit. I'm trying to pull something up here on my end, and my internet is somehow, Dan, in the middle of nowhere, has better internet connection than I do, and it's very upsetting.
JB, you gotta call that
very upsetting.
Company,
anyway,
Pittsburgh internet.
I know. So there are a few teams. We came into the fantasy offseason with 8 coaching vacancies. The New England Patriots filled that very quickly with Mayo, and I resorted the teams here in our show notes because I wanted to spend a little bit more time and make sure that we actually get through the teams that have fantasy and dynasty relevant players. Needless to say, I moved New England down to the bottom of that list. So let's start with the Atlanta Falcons. And with a lot of these, it isn't just the head coaching change that we're going to be seeing. There are so many moving pieces, and there's going to be so many variables. So the Atlanta Falcons, they have the 8th pick overall. I think this is 3 years in a row they have the 8th pick. Top dynasty assets, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier is there for one more year. Correction, Algier is through 2025. Drake London, Kyle Pitts. What are they going to do at quarterback? What are they going to do with the coaching situation here, Dan? What are your overall thoughts?
You did a good job, JB, as you always do, because we know you like the numbers, man. And you put some good notes together looking at the dynasty relevant players, their contracts, what assets they have, what draft picks that each team has. So we kind of see what opportunities there are to fix with those gaps. On my end, it wasn't a film study night, but I love the coach and management type things and look for continuity. And we'll get into 7 teams that you highlighted tonight. The one common denominator that all 7 of these teams had is they had a bottom half of the league offensive line. So I think that's interesting because for our fantasy guys to produce, we need some O-line production. And a lot of these coaches, man, are on a very short shelf life. So starting with Atlanta, Arthur Smith, which from in our fantasy world, we're all thrilled right now. Sad for him as a person personally. Never want to see families relocating, guys fired and all that. But for what we're doing here in fantasy, feature the stars, please. They've got the 8th pick overall in the draft. Now they've got to get themselves a head coach. Their GM's been there from since 2021. So he's returning. So like a building of the team kind of standpoint is still there. They're a team like many of these coaching changes that we're looking at tonight. Dave Ragone, their offensive coordinator, is still in place. Doesn't mean he's going to stay still in place, but they haven't made a decision to let him go or not. Arthur Smith was the play caller. So Ragone didn't call any plays or anything like that. So we're in for a big change, but we don't know what it's going to be yet. But bottom line, JB, I think this team has got to improve the O-line this offseason through the draft, get a little bit more protection for whoever that quarterback's going to be, and they need someone to throw the ball. I don't think any of us have really any confidence in Desmond Ridder. He couldn't overcome whatever O-line deficiencies they had. He had multiple chances. Heineke wasn't an answer as a backup. So, man, hopefully they feature Bijan a little bit more. Algier, he's kind of grown on me. He is a good running back, I think. We do see these teams that have 2 running back systems, and if they're good enough, you could get enough production out of both of them, although we definitely want to see more Bijan next year. Drake London's a stud. I will most likely roll the dice, but 8th pick overall, JB, they're probably going to get the rock to get London, Pitts, and Bijan the ball, right?
Yeah, whether they address the quarterback position at number 8, I think they would have to move up if they, want to get one of the top 3 quarterbacks. Number 3 on the list for a lot of people being Jaden Daniels. But from a value perspective, I think it's going to take a lot. Like Kyle Pitts and Drake London especially, Bijan Robinson, he's already set there at the top tier running back. But London and Pitts, they have that insulated value in the sense that anything that happens, any coach that comes in, quarterback that comes in, as long as we feel a little bit more comfortable with them compared to Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke, they're going to have that value insulation throughout the offseason. And we're already seeing the uptick with London and Pitts, whether it's a startup, whether it's trades taking place here early in the offseason. But the big thing for me, and it's going to be the case with a lot of these teams we're going to talk about tonight, what does Atlanta do? You talk about Dave Ragone, the offensive coordinator, probably doesn't stay in place. What do they do with the offensive coordinator position? Because for me, that's going to be a lot more relevant for our fantasy assets compared to what they do with the head coach. Bill Belichick getting a second interview, you look at New England and what they've done offensively, especially the last few years, it hasn't been great. But how much of that was the players that were available in New England, but also like get a strong offensive coordinator in place and get somebody that's like outside of your normal circle. Like, we don't want to see a Matt Patricia do anything there if Bill Belichick comes in, obviously from the defensive side. But you get these coaches that just keep retreading and re-popping up, whether it's like a Bill O'Brien, McDaniels. Why am I slipping on his first name?
Josh.
Holy moly. You mentioned caffeine before the show. I need to make some more coffee, I guess. But get something different there, and that's what's really going to be the differentiating factor here, I believe. And you talked about these teams that we're discussing tonight. There were 8 teams coming in, including the New England Patriots. 7 of those 8, the Chargers, the Titans, the Falcons, the Raiders, the Commanders, the Panthers, the Patriots. Everybody says defense wins championships. But 7 of those teams were in the bottom 13 in drives that ended in a score. So you go across the league, scoring percentage on drives, and you look at the teams that are still in the playoffs. Number 2 on that list is San Fran. 4 is Baltimore. 6 is Buffalo. Lions, Packers, Chiefs, Texans. So out of the top 14, we have 7 of the teams still in the playoffs. So, you got to be able to score in today's game. And it takes, whether it's like a Bill Belichick that is so just entrenched in his past ways, like you got to be more flexible, I think, and you have to adapt with the game.
I'm gonna call a timeout, not a challenge flag, but I'm gonna call a timeout to break on that.
Bring it, Dan. Bring it.
I want to know your thoughts because I was thinking about that a lot. And as we start with Atlanta here, as of today, Bill Belichick is a front runner, I believe, for that position. He's had 2 interviews. I think it was Josina Anderson posted something. I think it seemed trending in a Bill Belichickian direction there. But we go back. I mean, look at these Hall of Fame head coaches that, Belichick when he had Brady, Coach Tomlin when he had Big Ben. Those offenses through certain years were explosive. They lose their great Hall of Fame quarterback, and they just didn't have anyone to replace them. And they've had some O-line struggles. Those teams that you name in the playoffs, they've got some great quarterbacks. They've got some really good O-line play. So there's that part of me that says, hey, maybe Belichick could go in here and, at pick 8, could get that quarterback that he didn't have in New England, has a lot of weapons, which he didn't have in New England recently. So I wouldn't panic if Bill Belichick goes there, I think is my point here. I think there is some bodies of work in the past that have been really good. Hopefully he would, to your point, do things a little bit differently and maybe not retread and bring Josh McDaniels in and torture us again. But I think with the right quarterback, he could fix that. And with a really good defense, you get two sides of the ball playing complementary football and a good football team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying necessarily we're going to panic if a Bill Belichick ends up there or another defensive-minded coach, but just get somebody that you believe can excel in today's game. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat. Cole World, owner, GM, head coach, offensive coordinator, QB, all have to be aligned. And when we see that alignment and that continuity as it trickles down, and I kind of want to bring that up with the Carolina Panthers when we get there with David Tepper, it starts with ownership. When we talk about dysfunction, and that's Dan's big buzzword, there's too much dysfunction in Cleveland, as we've been saying in the intro for how long now. Nate says, even if by some miracle your defense-focused head coach manages to do well, you immediately lose your OC to a head coaching job. Check out Buffalo losing Dable, Slowick getting head coach interviews everywhere. I think that's true, but we talked about this in the Discord with like a Buffalo over the last 3 years. Their turnovers have certainly increased, but you're still seeing everything else kind of remain fairly flat from when Dable was there. So I think that scheme and that culture kind of, it still stays there in my mind. Kyle in the chat, Bill Belichick to the Cowboys. Maybe
ship sail.
Yeah. So anyway, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. I don't think the market has really shifted on those guys yet, because again, I think they are going to have that insulated value. And up to this point, you could tell yourself a story and you have those excuses. Do you think they go the route of a veteran quarterback, maybe free agency, maybe something via trade? I mean, what if they? I mean, hell, I've talked about Greg Roman as an offensive coordinator trickling around the league. I think Chicago has shown some interest. But what if it was Bill Belichick, Greg Roman, they trade for Justin Fields? I think there's a lot of hype around that offense all of a sudden.
Heck yeah. Fields is the domino that's going to move something that we didn't expect. And this would be a great situation because at pick 8, the top 3 quarterbacks are probably off the board. I think, the top 5, again, we don't know how the Fields thing plays into it. He's almost like a draft pick this year because the Bears draft someone new, or do they keep him? If they do trade him, then, hey, there's a 4 team that got a stud quarterback. But, there's still, I think, at least 4 good quarterbacks in this draft. So they have some options. And I think when you look at unrestricted free agents, JB, hey, does some team, poach Kirk Cousins. I don't know what Minnesota's plans are, but there's a guy that could at least produce for probably a year or two. Does Tampa Bay? I would like to think they're going to re-sign Baker after their playoff
I'd be
success
surprised
year
if
and
they
the year
didn't,
they have, but they've got to pony up. And then after that, it's kind of a drop, JB. I mean, we know about the Gardner Minshew's, Flacco
Russell
38.
Wilson's probably on the move somewhere along the way.
What happens with your boy Russ? I know you've got some pride in ownership there. I don't know if I'm as confident as you are, but he's serviceable. But I think you get to that serviceable category. Like, I think it's still like after those Cousins, if Baker resigns, Field doesn't move, you're starting to get a little bit nervous, depending on the coaching staff. Some coaches could get the best out of, some of those questionable free agents.
I don't know. I think for fantasy purposes, Drake London, Kyle Pitts managers, I don't think they'd be that disappointed if a Gardner Minshew ended up in Atlanta, if push comes to shove. Yeah. It's certainly a step up from what we saw with Desmond Ridder, and the combination of the offensive play calling and just the frustration that, my guy Jonnu Smith, he was pushing Kyle Pitts for fantasy purposes there. Anyway, but it certainly is going to be an interesting one and see how it plays out. But I think there is that value insulation, as I've mentioned a handful of times already. Seattle Seahawks. They have a 16th overall pick. Pete Carroll is gone. Now, we talk about dynasty assets. Geno Smith, quarterback 24, according to KTC, as of, I think this was 2 days ago. Kenneth Walker, running back 9. Zach Charbonnet, running back 23. Jackson Smith and Jigba, wide receiver 19. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 23. Noah Fant is a free agent. Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 63. So Geno, Walker, Metcalf, Lockett, all through 2025. And then we got Charbonnet and Jigba, Jackson Smith and Jigba as second-year players here. What would you like to see happen with Seattle? Because there was a lot of fantasy relevance here when we talk about the now 7 vacancies.
Yeah, let's just say Belichick went to Atlanta based on recent information. Vrabel interviewed with the Chargers today. And I know they're coming up on our list to talk about. And I think anyone who has a chance to get Justin Herbert, I think one of these top coaches are going to want that. That leaves Coach Harbaugh. So now I don't know how different that is. Maybe he brings a little more toughness than Carroll. Maybe he's won everywhere he's went.
Everything I'm seeing, though, it seems like he is the front runner for the Chargers job if he does come to the NFL.
So then if Harbaugh was, then it's, hey, I hope I would want Vrabel. After that, there's a little bit of I think, head coaching prospect dip. Houston offensive coordinator Slowick's a little hot commodity because he's coming out of that Shanahan tree. And I think, hey, us in fantasy are liking that Shanahan tree as well because we're seeing, I think, a lot of production out of the coaches in the league. And then after that, I might be forgetting somebody, JB. I'm hoping somebody takes Dan Quinn off the Cowboys. Maybe they want a guy that can build a program and is a good character person, so he might go somewhere. But 7 teams, there's only maybe, to me, I think 4 hot coaching candidates. I think Detroit, we got Detroit's offensive coordinator there is a hot prospect too, and Ben Johnson. But you don't know if these guys could run a team. There's still a jump there from OC to head coach, so we got to see.
Right. And I think you hit the nail on the head, and you mentioned him earlier, Bobby Slowick from the Texans. You get the OC from a team that everybody thought was absolutely crazy in trading their 24 first in the deal in the 23 draft. And now they are sitting here, the final 8 teams in the NFL playoffs. If he goes to Seattle, I think the expectations for fantasy purposes are going to be very high for Geno Smith, Jackson Smith and Jigba, DK Metcalf. I think expectations will be through the roof. And then it's going to be interesting. I mean, I say interesting, but to a lower degree, what they do with the tight end position. Do they keep rolling with like a Colby Parkinson, kind of just patchworking that room together? Not that they really relied on Noah Fant, but again, he is a free agent. I'm going to be very interested to see where Noah Fant goes because I think the talent's there still. In a guy like Noah Fant, he has the athletic profile. He's done it before, and we'll see how that shakes out. Sorry, I'm trying to go through some of the comments here. Tampa OC.
Nate mentioned Seattle potentially moving on from Lockett, JB, and then that is an interesting one because I think if Lockett was to move, the Dynasty community is really going to ramp up on JSN because then he's clear number 2, and him and Metcalf could put up some great production.
I talked about that during last week's episode with the dead cap hit, and if it's a post June 1 designation, it's very minimal dead cap. I think I'm minimal, but like 7 million to, I forget what the savings would have been. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but did mention that last week. So I think they could very well move on from a Tyler Lockett. And then, it would be interesting to see where he would go. But Geno Smith at quarterback 24, I think they stick with him, whoever comes in. I don't see, would they go with like a Michael Penix at 16 overall? I don't know. But this is one of the more intriguing situations. And with Pete Carroll, it was interesting because, and what they did from the offensive side of the ball, as Mitch mentioned last week, they were throwing at one of the higher rates in the NFL. The issue was their pace of play. They were tied with the Raiders and Titans at 59 plays per game. Dead last. So even though their pass rate's 58% last year with Pete Carroll at coach, only behind Washington, Minnesota, Kansas City, and Cincinnati, those teams are running 62 to 64 plays a game. 59 isn't necessarily, it's not going to cut it. So we would like to see an uptick there. And out of all the teams, I talked about 7 of the 8 being in the bottom 13 of drives, the scoring percentage, drives ending in a score. Seattle's the only one in the top half, and they came in at number 11 at 39% of their drives ending in a score. Let's just pick up the pace of play. So whoever comes in, I think they have the weapons in place. They have a quarterback that has shown he can support weapons at wide receiver. We have a nice 1-2 punch with Walker and Charbonnet. I think Geno Smith he's somebody that I'm looking to acquire at his current cost because I'm kind of reading the tea leaves, thinking that they're going to go with an offensive-minded head coach here in especially a division where they have to put up points. I talk about it across the board, but especially in that division.
Yeah, and Seattle was a team, and this often happens with us. We've had this conversation before. Going into the year, I was really high on them. I thought this is an offense that could really have taken the next step, with JSN unlocking, give them that extra weapon, and it just didn't quite happen. You shared a lot of it with the pace of play. Their O-line, as I mentioned, being in the bottom half was really bad. I mean, they were rolling out Jason Peters, which is like my age, JB, and those football years are gone, man. So they really got to shore up that O-line bad. But it could be one of those fantasy examples where, hey, it was just a year off. Don't give up on them. Don't bail too early. The right offensive coordinator could really unlock this offense with all those weapons, but they definitely have to finish completing that O-line. You can't roll out there with Jason Peters. I watched enough of those games from a fantasy perspective to get frustrated watching things fall apart.
There was a question in the chat from Nate, who I always forget is Cole in the chat. He always sneaks in here as Nate, and I'm like, oh, this Nate guy, that's a new. No, it's not a new name. Anyway, he says, would you rather have Geno or Will Levis right now for dynasty purposes? You can get a plus with Geno if you're moving Will Levis. And I have maybe 1 or 2 shares still lingering that I wasn't able to move during the season. I personally would still prefer Geno Smith. I do think they had that. I think it's almost similar to what we saw with Matthew Stafford and the Rams like last year. 2 years ago, that offense was fantastic. Last year, awful. This year, the post hype, if you will, really exceeded expectations. So I think people are coming down in the Seattle offense, and I do think that they move up a little bit more, kind of what we saw 2 years ago.
Yep. And this is an organization that there's still a lot of continuity. John Schneider's still their GM. He's been there since 2010. I don't know what's going to happen with Shane Waldron. He is technically still on the roster. Again, most often coaches come in, they bring in their own staff, but depending on what coach they bring in, who knows? But this is an organization that likes their players, and Geno, to me, is a lot safer than Will Levis. I don't even know if Will Levis is actually the answer, and you're going to bring in a new coaching staff that did not draft him. So again, Seattle's management, they're in on their players right now.
I see the comment from Wes. I missed this a few minutes ago. Besides Harbaugh, are there any other college coaches that could land an NFL head coaching job? I saw is it the Stanford coach or the former Stanford coach got an interview, but then in the report from Schefter or Rappaport, at the end of the blurb, it said they have now checked the box on the Rooney Rule or something like that. I'm like, that is such a backhanded.
Well, that was David Shaw, wasn't it? I think David
Shaw. Yes, Shaw. Thank you. And is he still in Stanford? Is at Stanford?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Anyway, not to get too hung up.
I don't think so. I think he was, because I think Troy Taylor's their head football coach now.
All right. Joe in the chat, Seattle wants Ben Johnson, and same thing as Slowick. There's gonna be a lot of excitement, and we're gonna see a bump in value for JSN. We'll see a bump in value for DK Metcalf and Geno Smith. I still think he's gonna be slept on. So if I had to plant a flag on a middling quarterback right now at a very reasonable price, it would be a player like Geno Smith.
JB, if I'm just doing math here, kind of like we do in the offseason with quarterbacks and landing spots. You got the 3 great veteran coaches. Okay, the GOAT, Vrabel, Harbaugh, they're all going to go somewhere. The 2 hot OCs and Slowick and Ben Johnson, they're going to go somewhere. So that's 5. Let's say the Raiders bring back Antonio Pierce. I know we're going to get to him. That's 6. I bet you, if I'm a betting man, the Carolina Panthers are the odd team like that, unless they pay so much for somebody and kind of steal it. But that's just where my mind was going for a second.
I don't think that's crazy at all, and we'll get there in a second. The only team of all of the teams we're going to discuss tonight that, well, I don't want to write Bryce Young off yet, but right now, as it stands today, the only team that has their franchise quarterback. And again, I don't want to write Will Levis off yet before anybody attacks me, but the Chargers have Justin Herbert. Okay. So Brandon Staley gone, Giff Smith, whatever Giff Smith is it Giff or Jiff? I don't know. But their top dynasty asset. So Giff was in there as the interim head coach. You got Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen through 24, Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer through 24, Austin Eckler is a free agent. Gerald Everett is a free agent. Pardon my language, but this offense is looking a little shitty potentially, even with Justin Herbert quarterback.
This is the most interesting organization, but I think this is like the dream opportunity to go into, not just because of Justin Herbert, but you're going to be going in with a new general manager. I think it was in our comments earlier that everybody has to be on the same page together. Head coach, OC, GM, et cetera. I think it was Cole. Here it is, Cole World Tide. They all got to be aligned, right? So what a chance for alignment. When they hired Coach Staley, and I was geeking out watching all these press conferences, I loved what Chargers ownership said. And I think they really did have good intentions and a good plan. And then just Coach Staley wasn't the guy, so 3 years, you're recycling. Kellen Moore's in there too. He's probably going to go unless for some reason they want to keep the Coach Madden, the call player there. But you're getting a new GM, you got a franchise quarterback, and you got the 5th overall pick in the draft, JB. 5th and 37. Like, wow.
Brock Bowers. And I failed to mention Mike
Great.
Williams. He's there through 24 as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then Joe in the chat says free agents are going to flock to the Chargers. You look at the wide receivers. We have T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Hollywood Brown, Mike Evans, Calvin Ridley, Brandon Cooks, Gabe Davis, Curtis Samuel. So, I mean, there's certainly viable options. They have the 37th pick overall. I think that could be a player like a Xavier Worthy. So there are, I'm not saying this is the offense they're going to go into the season with, of course, but as we stand right now, it could be a little shaky. But I mean, I said it in the chat. I think this season, the way the offense played out for Dallas, the way the offense played out for the Chargers, it really did not. It wasn't a good look for Kellen Moore.
Yep. I kind of saw that coming. Again, I just experiencing Kellen Moore for some years in Dallas. Again, he did some things good. All right. There is a bright mind there, but it just doesn't translate into managing a football game. You're caught up a little bit too much in the analytics world, as was Coach Staley. And we saw it again. And we've just seen this cycle in with the Chargers that have just kind of not utilized the franchise quarterback. But they've got some really good choices there. But I think free agency, they're another team that's got to shore up their offensive line. Do they grab a Brock Bowers, or do you get a stud receiver and like Nabbers from LSU, or, an old lineman? I don't know. They got choices, and then they pick again at 37. So you're going to get a nice pick in the second round too. That could be an impact player. They're in a really good position.
And I'm seeing the conversation here. There's too many coaches with similar names. So Ben Johnson in Detroit, Brian Johnson in Philly, right? That's what I'm seeing here. And then we got McDaniels. Like, I can't do all this, too many.
Hey, you just got to know Harbaugh or Vrabel. That's all you got to know for the Chargers, because I'm almost positive they're going to get one of those two.
And I think, and it's always interesting, right? Whenever you have coach in general, because you always think about, okay, what did they do at their previous stops, and was it they use the weapons at their disposal, and that's kind of how they formulated their offense, especially if it's an offensive minded coach, or they went in, this is what I'm going to do, and whatever pieces I have, I'm going to make them fit into that. We had some comments in the chat and some discussion. Well, what did Harbaugh do in Michigan? It's always interesting when you look at a college coach coming to the NFL and trying to figure out what tendencies and, pass to run and all that stuff, how much of that is really going to carry over. And especially when you look at who his OC is going to be if Harbaugh does land in Los Angeles. So I just think making sure that we're paying attention to, things might not play out exactly as expected, and, copy and paste situation. Okay, here's what they did at the collegiate level. They're going to be somewhat similar in the NFL. I just, it's an interesting thought exercise. But yeah, with the 5th overall pick, I saw somebody comment Neighbors. That would be fantastic. Rome Odunze from Washington, he's going to be up there somewhere.
There's options there, man.
Yeah.
And Greg mentions too, Harbaugh made a Super Bowl. He's won everywhere he's went. Stanford, Michigan, Niners. And I think if you win, you're going to get fantasy production. It's a great place to go.
Yeah. Oh, I see Cole in the chat. He says, John and I made a banger of a trade that involved Brock Bowers this time last year in a league. Oh gosh, I think I have to look back. I think it was like Christian Kirk, Hollywood, Komet, and something else. Anyway, that's just trying to remember here. But the Chargers. So Justin Herbert, do you feel comfortable with his current? Like, I have him still in that quarterback 4 to 7. Is that fair?
Yep, because you're putting him in there with like Burrow, Stroud. He's that type of quarterback. I think he's going to get a really good coach, and they got the draft capital. No reason to not expect production from him.
Yeah, and then
he's young.
Do you think Quentin Johnston has the potential to bounce back? Seeing a lot of trade polls in the chat, a lot of people, looking to move him for close to nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting a new GM and a new head coach come in here that didn't even draft him. So we knew he was going to be kind of raw going in, and he didn't even really come on in the second half. We didn't even see that second half rookie surge. And, maybe there was a tiny bit more production, but that wasn't much of a bar there to really get me excited. So I'm not too high on him. I'm not going after him this offseason, JB. I have no reason to. I'll be watching what they do at the other receiver positions.
Yeah. All right. Looking at Tennessee, we got Will Levis, Tajay Spears, Derrick Henry is a free agent, DeAndre Hopkins, 1 more year, Traylon Burks, Jiggy Okonkwo. I saw Tajay Spears is trading around the running back 13 or 14 in Dynasty now.
Hey, he flashed, man. He showed something at least.
I mean, he's one of my most rostered running backs going to year 2. He was slipping in a lot of rookie drafts. There was concern over the knees. I kept saying he's gonna He's going to be good till he isn't. He's going to hit that cliff, and he's going to hit it hard eventually, a la like a Jay Ajayi, Todd Gurley. Not saying Tajay Spears is Todd Gurley before, again, I got to get out ahead of that. But we talked about Will Levis a little bit. What direction do you think this team goes? Like I think Mike Vrabel is a very good coach.
Yes.
Not fantasy related. I know I don't talk about the actual football side of things too often. I try to leave that to you, Dan. But I think he's a good coach. He's going to land somewhere else. But for fantasy purposes, was it a Mike Vrabel issue? Was it a personnel issue, or C, all of the above?
I am greatly concerned that Titans are entering into that dysfunction phase. You've got owner Amy Strunk, who brings in Rand Carthon as the GM in 23, and I don't know where in their conversation said Mike Vrabel, after six very good years, they struggled a bit this year. Tannehill got hurt. Some guys are getting a little bit older. You traded AJ Brown. We go back. Vrabel wasn't happy with that AJ Brown move, is my recollection of it. Where are they going? In 2 years from now, are you going to get something better than Coach Vrabel? They do have the 7th overall pick in the draft, so they at least got a high asset for someone coming in that says, hey, it's a clean slate. This team's got a vision. There's only 32 jobs in the NFL and only in the world that are this good, and 7 are open. So there's a chance they can land someone, but I don't think it's going to be Belichick. I don't think it's going to be Vrabel. I don't think it's going to be Harbaugh. So if Coach Slowick or Ben Johnson's the answer, they better get it right, because great coaches don't grow on trees, and you're just letting Vrabel go. I don't understand that.
Now, is there any concern here with Tajay Spears? You talk about these other players coming in, and their coach is no longer there that was involved with drafting them. And any thoughts there with Tajay Spears? We mentioned with Will Levis.
Spears, I think, is a little bit different because he's a rookie, he's young, and he looked good. If I'm going in there, I need some guys that I could build this team around. We've kind of gotten the vibe that Derrick Henry's not returning. So what do you have in the cupboards? Hey, he's on a rookie contract. He's not going to hurt our cap. Let's run this kid till he can't run no more. We got to build this team around O-line, which they greatly need. And I think, Will Levis is the big question, JB, because do you fight for a quarterback at 7, or do you get an O-lineman that you desperately need too? You need both. And I think in the NFL, you've got to build your team around the line and quarterback. Without them, nothing else matters.
At quarterback 19 in Dynasty, is that something you're okay with investing in Will Levis?
I'm going to say I've got to update my rankings, JB, but probably not. In my mind, I don't think I even have him at 19. I just don't know he's their quarterback next year. I'm not really a Levis believer. I'm not a Titans believer now. I'm not happy Vrabel's gone. I think if we go back in time, he really wanted Malik Willis to work out, which was not the right idea or right plan, but they weren't quite quick to go to Will there. So, Hopkins is getting a little older. He's not getting any younger. I think he still has some more production in him. Burks might be a little better as long as he can stay healthy and Hopkins is there, but I don't know. There's not a lot to hold my hat on with the Titans right now.
Yeah, as you can see, as we start to work our way down this list, there's fewer and fewer real dynasty assets to talk about. And up next with the Las Vegas Raiders, Josh McDaniels gone during the season. This team played, and they played hard for Antonio Pierce. And I saw the blurb about Max Crosby saying he might request a trade. Was that an actual report? Was it but it seems like the players want Antonio Pierce to stay. And we saw this with the Raiders before, right? They had the interim coach. The team played. They played well, and they went another direction. The name of the coach is slipping my mind right now. But looking at their top dynasty assets, Josh Jacobs is a free agent. Devontae Adams through 2026, he's there. Does he get traded maybe? Jacoby Myers, he had a great season. He's there through 2025. Based on the pre-draft process and at times what we saw during his rookie season, I'm still in on Michael Mayer. And the one thing that really kept him off the field early in the season, and you saw it during the preseason, you saw it during workouts, whatever. His blocking, which was a strength in college, was horrendous. And he really improved that aspect of his game as the season continued. So I think Michael Mayer, he's certainly an interesting player here that I'm keeping an eye on. And at his current price, he's one of those young tight ends. He's not Sam Laporta. He's not Dalton Kincaid. He's not Trey McBride. But we saw a player like Trey McBride really struggle during his rookie season. And, not necessarily apples to apples comparison between the two, but Michael Mayer does check a lot of the boxes that I was looking for as an incoming rookie. So is Aiden O'Connell the guy there in Las Vegas? Or at number 13, do they look at a Michael Penix?
Yeah, is there Michael Penix, or do you try to trade up a couple spots and get a Bo Nix or somebody? Like, is there a quarterback, JB, there?
Do you think Bo Nix goes before 13?
I don't know. I think there's potential to. You know how hungry these teams are for quarterbacks, and we definitely see a need for quarterbacks in the National Football League. So I wouldn't rule it out. I'm not that far in my film study, but I think he's a name that I've always been intrigued by in the getting into this range.
Yeah, so, again, especially the quarterback position, whether it's fantasy folks, whether it's these people that put together their actual NFL mocks. I always use the example up until the morning of, there was a mock that came out. The name is slipping me, but they still have Malik Willis going at the back of the first round in his respective NFL draft. And we saw how that played out. That was the morning of round 1. Everybody thought Will Levis, Will Levis could be a top 5 pick. And well, we saw how that played out.
Yep. And they're the things we've got to find out. With Las Vegas, it's okay. Hey, if they don't draft a quarterback at 13, I don't think O'Connell's the answer. I think he's a good backup. He held his own as a rookie this year, but I think, someone's got to sign a Gardner Minshew, a Jacoby Brissett, a Ryan Tannehill. Maybe you saw enough from Drew Lock when he stepped in for Geno. Hey, do you ride these guys for a year while you develop the O-line and see where the chips fall? They've definitely got some receivers, and I'm with you on Myers.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. Aiden O'Connell, I just same thing. A new coach is going to come in. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo is there still. I
think they go back to Pierce unless for somehow they could land a big fish. I don't think we've seen Las Vegas interview anyone big yet at this point. And I don't know what the latest reports are there, but unless they can get a big coach, I could see him going back to Pierce, but he's got a lot of work to do. And I think he was cool to watch. And I think when you got your potential defensive player of the year there going to bat saying, I want this guy back, there's a good chance they get him. But year 2, man, he's got to solidify that OC there and that offense and find himself a quarterback and some line.
Should we be buying into shift to the Commanders who have the number 2 pick? Should we be buying into a Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson?
I don't understand how they didn't use Dotson more last year. I know Eric Bieniemy's still on their staff. My gut says this new coach, whoever it is going to let Bieniemy go and fix that offense, because poor Sam Howell, whether he's the answer or not, he took a beating last year. So they've got to fix that O-line. They've got to, discover what they have in Sam Howell if they can fix the O-line. But I think Dotson's still talented. We got to see what happens with Curtis Samuel. And again, we need to know who's going to run that offense there. I'm a little bit encouraged that they've got a management team in there that's had success with other professional organizations, and they potentially could build this thing the right way, and they've got some pieces. So let's see what they can do with the O-line, and let's see if they can protect their quarterback this year. I think if they protect their quarterback, I honestly think Sam Howell could produce, but this is like Bieniemy's offense is pass happy. It's like automatic going to give you fantasy production somewhere. I think the one guy I definitely like no matter what is Brian Robinson. He just looked good this year. He looked good catching the ball. He ran tough. I'm a bit higher on Brian Robinson.
Yeah, we have Antonio Gibson being a free agent. You know what I think would be interesting if Dallas brings in Derrick Henry and Antonio Gibson. They're an intriguing pair in a
complement
backfield.
Each other. I
think they could. And I wouldn't be shocked if a player like Curtis Samuel went to the Chiefs. They've tried some of these wide receivers, Kadarius Toney, getting these guys underneath, getting the ball early, and it hasn't really panned out. So I think a player like Curtis Samuel could be a good fit there. That would be interesting. But for me, still in green on the Dynasty tiers on the Dynasty Theory Patreon, Terry McLaurin is somebody that I'm still investing in. He was good enough with the struggles that we saw there in Washington and with Sam Howell and the poor offensive line play, as you mentioned. I think they bring in a quarterback at 2, Drake May. I'd be surprised if May doesn't land there, but
and then you
go, those 2 receivers or somebody they're interesting.
Yeah, and then they can pick again at 36 and 40, 67. You could get some linemen in those picks and start building this team the right way with a quarterback, with some linemen fixing that. Riverboat Ron wasn't the answer. He had 4 years, but he's won 1 year in his life there. New management. I think you got a clean slate and some hope there in Washington. McLaurin, the only thing, JB, is he's pushing 30 here in the dynasty world.
He's dirt cheap.
That's the key. You got to get him on the cheap if you want some production for a couple years. Dude's a hard worker. He's a good wide receiver. Just get him. Don't overpay. That's all.
And he's not unless I'm just not hearing it, you don't see him come out and complain. You don't hear about you always talk about body language of players on the sideline. They might be pouting or these interviews or social media. You don't hear a thing about Terry McLaurin.
No, he's a coach's dream. He is Washington franchise. He is their guy that they're in that organization. They're saying, hey, we love Terry McLaurin. The thing is, in fantasy, we say, hey, do you want the wide receiver 1 in Washington? He's not really a wide receiver 1. I think he's more of a good number 2, which is good fantasy production. Again, I'm not giving a first round pick or anything for the number 1 receiver in Washington just because they're bringing in this exciting new quarterback and there's a lot of buzz in the organization. I'll give a second round pick, JB.
Did I say we're 47 minutes in? This is a record. This is the first time I get that annoyed tone with Dan. Did I say I was sending a first for him?
Did I say you said you were giving a first? You didn't tell the listeners anything. So I was helping develop a price structure, JB. Man, where's Mitch when we need him?
Yeah, I know.
Cancun, somewhere warm and tropical.
You can get Terry McLaurin for a lot less. I have him right now tiered with that 111. You don't need to move a 111. You don't. You could get away with probably a 206 plus a little something.
See, you're clarifying now. I like that.
All I do is clarify. I'm trying to let you run the show tonight, Dan.
Hey, I was just thinking of the listeners. So we got there. We landed there.
Do you even want to spend a minute talking about the Patriots?
I mean, I would spend a minute just to say, I know who Jared Mayo is, but who the heck's Jared Mayo? You are promoting your linebacker coach that's never been a coordinator in his entire life. I'm assuming he's bringing Bill O'Brien back, maybe, because he's still technically listed as the offensive coordinator there. So do we know what we're getting? Does Ramondre come back healthy? They need receivers bad. They need O-line bad. They need a quarterback. They're entering dysfunction land, but they have the number 2 pick in the draft, so they're going to get that quarterback. Pick number 34. They can help the O-line.
They have the number 3 pick. I had a typo. Washington has 2. I have every team on the sheet with the number 2 pick.
I'm reading
Patriots have
show notes. Come on, JB.
I know. Patriots have the 3.
You're getting tangled up in the sheets tonight, man. You're getting tangled up.
Patriots have the 3.
Yeah. So my question is,
Jaden
the head
Daniels.
coach. What direction is that going in? Because it's Belichick was the GM too there, and you lose your head coach and GM since 2000. Wow. That's going to be interesting to see what happens.
All right, that leaves us with Carolina. And I don't often bring up the dysfunction aspect, but I don't see, you talk about the top dynasty assets here. Here's the list: Bryce Young, and then Jonathan Mingo and Chuba Hubbard. That I know we have the ongoing Tommy Tremble joke, but Miles Sanders, things didn't really work out there in 2023 for him. What happens here in 24 and beyond? But then Mingo, there were some ups. There were plenty of downs there for him in his rookie season, but they don't have a pick till 33. you know, Bryce Young is not a quarterback I'm looking to invest in because I don't see, no matter who they bring in at head coach, offensive coordinator, I don't see how they can bring in other weapons that like this screams dysfunction from the ownership and David Tepper down.
I don't even know where you go with this, JB. I really don't. Like, I always get frustrated in the National Football League. I know it's like an average 3-year shelf life for coaches where, man, in our businesses, if you're rehiring every 3 years, that's a lot of time and money you're wasting. Carolina's like on a 1-year cycle here. Frank Reich didn't even get a year. Their GM's gone. I don't know where they're going. Thomas Brown, I guess, is still there. Like, Chuba Hubbard is the only one that kind of surprised me this year. And no matter how bad Carolina's been every year, they seem to sort of establish a good schematic run game and, manage that. So I think he at least showed he's if he's not a starter, he's a good handcuff running back for a dynasty. I was not impressed with Mingo last year. He was a guy I was a little more hopeful on going in. I'm not on Mingo. Bryce Young, I'm greatly concerned. I mean, they got no O-line. They've got no first-round pick.
And the offensive line,
trade.
The offensive line, something that we kind of thought might have been a strength based on what we saw in 2022. You had Deontay Foreman, you had Chuba Hubbard, both being productive there towards the back half of the season, both, running fairly well. That offensive line was absolutely horrendous this year and certainly didn't help Bryce Young at all. But I just, whether it's Bryce Young or not, I can't see myself in investing in him from a dynasty perspective, because I think if you wanted to, that price to acquire is going to be a heck of a lot cheaper in 12 months than it is today.
Agreed. I don't see anywhere you could go with this team anywhere quick. That was the worst trade ever to get Bryce Young. Poor kid. I almost feel bad for him. Like it just doesn't. There's no logical sense there. So good luck whoever gets that job. But I hope they get some securities in their contract or something, and that maybe you do start with a young coach and you build this and you build it from the ground up. But it's going to take some time.
But that's the thing. Like Tepper, and he's the owner of teams in other sports, right? And they showed the number of coaches he fired in like 18 months or whatever. Like, is he an owner that's going to give time that's necessary here? I don't know.
Yeah. Whoever's taking that job is, hey, they know it's one of 32 jobs in the NFL and it goes on their resume, but good luck working with David Tepper. And again, your cupboards are just bare. You've got nothing in there in offense. I'd be curious what their salary cap is. Where's Mitch when we need him? He's normally the salary cap guy. I mean, can they at least spend some money or something? I don't know if they can put some Band-Aids on this, but if I were them, I'd just gut it out through next year. And hopefully the year after, JB, they could get the number 1 pick in the draft.
I just think you might say we should temper expectations. Had to get one bad pun in there. But last year, Carolina Panthers had 13 passing touchdowns. That was tied with the Pittsburgh Steelers, only above the New York Jets, who had 11. So if we are in the same sentence, the same breath as the Pittsburgh Steelers and the New York Jets and what we saw in 2023, it doesn't look promising, especially with all the other dysfunction. I can't believe I'm saying that word more than Dan has, but there's too
much dysfunction in Carolina, JB. They have replaced the Browns.
Yeah, I know people, they had their pre-draft conception of Bryce Young, and they're kind of going back to that, but we saw enough, I think, here in year one that I don't want to take the risk. And you guys talk about Bryce Young here because do you want to talk about Adam Thielen for dynasty purposes? Nobody cares.
Hey, maybe someone could tap into Tommy Tremble's potential though, JB.
The trembling is not happening. The trembling is not happening.
Final thoughts.
Dan, for the 230th time, I know you always enjoy the coaching episodes, and it seems like every single year it gets more and more interesting. But what do you got for our listeners' final thoughts?
Yeah, man, that was fun tonight. It always kind of just crafts the beginning of the offseason and what direction these organizations are going. And again, I always take that stance of, hey, if you have a tie between two players of equal value, I try to find that coaching and management, that better situation. So hopefully it can last a little bit longer. But final thought, man, I just, I'm seeing the buzz in our Discord, startup talk, and, we're in a lot of leagues, and, there's a couple teams kind of drop out here and there and orphan out. And I would just want to give some advice is those that are looking to get into startups and find new leagues to really think it through, man. Learn about the different sleeper and MFL formats that you're getting into. Know your league mates, what kind of league you want to get into, know what your budget is, just to try to give no one's going to be mad at you if you leave a league at some point and you do it the right way. You try not to leave a team in shambles, and you communicate with your commission, all those things. But, hey, we love Dynasty, and the more continuity and stronger our leagues are, the better. So as you go into this Dynasty season, which I know are going to have some great offseason episodes about startups and values and all that, really, before you just hop in a league, give it some good thought. So hopefully it's a long-term solution for you.
There you go. Hopefully you all enjoyed this week's episode, talking about the coaching changes, some of the Dynasty implications, but a lot of more NFL talk, I think, than we typically have. So if this is the first time you've listened to Dynasty Theory, not that there's anything wrong with actual NFL talk, but typically it is much more focused on the Dynasty aspect of the game. But we got to give Coach Dan at least one episode a year. We got to give him one. Then
that,
maybe later in the offseason, we'll let you talk about best ball and all that stuff. Just one episode. But anyway, catch us next Tuesday. We have an episode of the Pivot Point this weekend. I will be live on the Dynasty Theory Patreon on Saturday. Probably talk about some startup stuff. But for Mitch Sorensen, who's not on tonight's episode, obviously, hopefully an hour in, you've noticed he's at an all-inclusive resort, just living the life. For Dan Lamagna, I'm John Bauer. Have a great week.